Welcome to today's story, Within These Sacred Walls, generated by StoryWave.ai, February 2024. Please tap that like button, share, and subscribe for more. Chapter 1, Eli's Routine. Before the sun peaks over the horizon, I'm already stirring. My name's Elijah, but folks around here call me Eli. Most mornings I'm up with the roosters, but today the quiet before dawn feels heavier, like the sky's holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. First Light Community Church is where I find myself at the start of each day, a sanctuary that's more than just weathered pews and stained glass. Today, the church's wooden doors greet me with the familiar creak, a sound that usually comforts me. But as I step inside, there's a disconnect, as if the hallowed walls and I are strangers. The first light filters through the windows, casting patterns on the floor that seem to dance just out of my reach. Mama Grace, with her salt and pepper hair and dove-like spirit, is the first to notice my presence. "Mornin', Eli," she calls out, her warm voice wrapping around me like a well-worn quilt. But today it fails to reach the coldness inside me. I muster a smile. "Morning, Mama Grace." I slide into my usual spot in the back, where the wooden bench is polished smooth from years of seeking solace. The service begins, and Pastor John's voice fills the room, deep and stirring. His words are meant to uplift, to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. But as I listen, a chasm opens up within me, a split between what I've always believed and the doubts that now gnaw at my faith. I can't help but think of the recent troubles that have shaken my life to its core. Loss and grief have become unwelcome companions, whispering questions that I'm afraid to answer. The more I grapple with them, the more elusive peace becomes. As we stand to sing a hymn, my voice joins in, but it sounds hollow, even to my own ears. The melody, once a source of strength, now feels like a thin veil over the turmoil roiling inside me. After the service, I linger, watching the congregation mingle. Laughter and light-hearted chatter fill the air, yet I feel like an observer, an outsider in my own community. "You all right, Eli?" Pastor John approaches, his deep eyes searching mine. I nod, not trusting my voice. Just thinking is all. He claps a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. But even that feels distant, a reminder of the internal battle that rages quietly within me. As I leave the church, the morning sun has fully risen, casting long shadows that seem to stretch out like fingers, grasping for something just out of reach. The day ahead looms, and within me, the struggle between faith and doubt continues, a relentless tug-of-war that I must face alone. I walk away from the church, the sounds of fellowship fading behind me. I'm left with nothing but the echo of my own footsteps and the weight of the decision that lies ahead, between the path of eternal life and the abyss of everlasting death. The sacred walls of the church stand tall and firm, but within me, the foundation crumbles. Today, my routine feels like a riddle, a puzzle that I'm unsure I want to solve. But solve it I must, for within these sacred walls and within the sacred confines of my own mind, my journey of self-discovery has only just begun. Chapter 2, The Questioning. The church was still buzzing from the morning service as I lingered in the pews, the echo of Pastor John's sermon about life's choices hanging in the air like a thick fog. My mind spun with the weighty concepts of predestination and free will, the two locked in an intricate dance within the depths of my thoughts. I caught sight of Mama Grace, her warm hazel eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. With her stout build and the golden cross necklace glinting at her neck, she moved through the crowd toward me. "Eli, child, you look like you've been hit with a sack of bricks," she said, her voice a soothing balm to my restless spirit. I chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "That's one way to put it, Mama Grace." She sat beside me, the worn wooden pew creaking under us. "What's troubling you?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "It's just..." Pastor John spoke of choices, of paths laid out before us. But if it's all written already, where does that leave us? Do we really choose anything at all? Mama Grace nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "Ah, the age-old question of our fate versus our will. It's enough to tie your brain in knots." I looked at her, searching for some hint of direction. "How do you handle it? How do you reconcile the idea that we're following a divine plan and yet we're supposed to make our own choices?" She tilted her head, considering. "Eli, think of it like a river. The water has its course set by the landscape, the way God sets our path. But within that river, the water still moves. It makes ripples. It reacts to the wind and the stones in its way. That's us, making choices, reacting, living. I pondered her words, the imagery settling into the space where confusion had taken root. So we're the ripples? Exactly. We can't change the river's path, but we're not without influence. We're part of a bigger picture, but we're still painting our own strokes. It was a comforting thought, a way to view the world that gave room for both the guiding hand of a higher power and the autonomy of the individual. So what's next for you, Ely? What ripples are you going to make? Her question was gentle but pointed. I took in a deep breath, the scent of polished wood and hymnals filling my senses. I don't know yet. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I'm not sure which direction leads to salvation and which to ruin. Mama Grace placed a hand on my arm, her touch grounding. You're not alone in this, Eli. You have people who care about you, who will walk with you as you figure it out. I met her gaze, feeling the truth of her words. It wasn't just about finding my way. It was about allowing others to help light the path. The church slowly emptied, leaving us in the growing stillness. I stood, ready to face the day with a new perspective. Thank you, Mama Grace, I said, for being a guiding star in a sky that sometimes feels too vast. She stood as well, her presence a solid force. Anytime, child, we'll navigate this river together. As I stepped out of the church, the sunlight seemed less harsh, the shadows less ominous. I was beginning to understand that the journey I was on was not just about the destination, but also about the ripples I made along the way. The questioning of my soul was far from over, but for the first time, I felt equipped to embrace the complexities of the road ahead. My spiritual beliefs and life's direction might be unclear, but I was not without guidance, not without hope. Chapter 3. Shadows of Doubt. The center was a place where laughter usually bounced off walls, and the sound of sneakers squeaked on the polished gym floor. My role as a counselor here always felt like a calling, a chance to guide and lift up those who were searching for their way. But today, as the sun hung low in the sky, I walked through the doors feeling like I was dragging shadows behind me. Mr. Brooks, you got a minute? Marcus, a lanky teenager with a storm always brewing in his dark eyes, approached me. His hair was a wild tangle of curls that seemed to defy gravity, and today he wore a hoodie that drowned his slight frame. I forced a smile, trying to push my own uncertainties aside. For you, Marcus? Always. We found a quiet corner, away from the buzz of the center. He fidgeted, his hands twisting the strings of his hoodie before he looked up, his brown eyes meeting mine. It's my brother, he started, his voice rough like gravel. He's been hanging with the wrong crowd, and I don't know how to pull him back. I listened, but as Marcus spoke, I felt my own doubts creeping in, muting the words I usually found comfort in offering. What advice could I give when my own faith was faltering? Marcus, it's tough, but you've got to be the light for him, even when it's dark, I said, but the words felt hollow, recycled from a version of myself that seemed increasingly distant. He squinted at me, sensing the shift. You okay, Mr. Brooks? You seem different. I hesitated. Sharing my struggles might crack the image he had of me, but perhaps honesty was what we both needed. I've been wrestling with some things, Marcus. My beliefs, my direction in life. It's got me questioning a lot. He leaned back, surprise etched on his young face. You? But you're always so sure about stuff. I chuckled dryly. Not lately, but I'm trying to figure it out. Marcus nodded slowly, his demeanor shifting. Maybe we're both trying to find our way out of the dark. Our conversation stretched on, the weight of our shared uncertainty forging an unexpected connection. As we spoke, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from others seeking guidance, reminders of the expectations resting on my shoulders. Look, Mr. Brooks, Marcus said, standing up with a newfound resolve. Maybe we can help each other. You keep me on track, and I'll remind you of why you do this job. It was a simple offer, but it sparked something within me. A flicker of purpose amidst the fog. Deal, I said, and we shook hands, an unspoken pact between us. As the day wore on, I found myself moving through my tasks with Marcus's words echoing in my thoughts. The interactions with the community, once a source of fulfillment, now felt like I was going through the motions, a shadow of doubt cast over each step. It wasn't until the center had quieted down, the echoes of the day's chaos fading, that I sat alone, contemplating the internal struggle that had taken root within me. The battle between the person I was and the person I felt myself becoming seemed to grow with each passing moment. The center, once a marker of hope and change, now felt like a mirror reflecting back my own insecurities. The walls, adorned with posters of aspiration and success, seemed to taunt me with their messages. The faces of those I counseled swam in my mind, their trust in me a weighty reminder of the role I was expected to fulfill. I stood up, taking a deep breath as I prepared to lock up for the night. The key turned in the lock with a definitive click, a sound that seemed to resonate within the empty halls. As I walked home, the sky now a canvas of twilight hues, I realized that the shadows of doubt would follow me, an ever-present companion on my journey of self-discovery. But maybe, just maybe, with the help of those around me, like Marcus, I could learn to walk through them, to find the light that would guide me back to a place of certainty and faith. Chapter 4. The Fall. The morning sun crept through the blinds of my small office at the community center, casting long stripes across the floor. It was a new day, but the brightness didn't reach the heaviness in my heart. The news had hit me like a rushing wave last night. Jamal, one of the youths I'd been working closely with, had stumbled back into old, harmful habits. Sitting in my chair, I stared at the well-worn basketball on my desk, a gift from Jamal after we'd won the local youth tournament. It was a symbol of progress, of hope. Now it just felt like a cruel joke. I could hear the cheerful chatter of staff and kids outside, but I felt like I was in a bubble, sounds muffled, movements sluggish. The door creaked open and Grace's voice cut through the stillness. "Eli, we need to talk." I didn't look up. "Grace, please, not now." She pulled up a chair and sat down anyway, her presence firm and unyielding. "What happened with Jamal isn't your fault." I shook my head, squeezing the bridge of my nose. "Isn't it? I was supposed to guide him, to be an example. And now..." Grace leaned in, her eyes soft yet piercing. "You've done more for these kids than anyone. You can't carry their choices on your shoulders." Her words were meant to comfort, but they bounced off me, unable to find a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. "It's not just Jamal," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything. My faith, my purpose, it's all slipping through my fingers." She reached out, placing a hand atop mine. "You're in a dark place, Ely, but you don't have to stay there. Let me help you." I pulled my hand away, a mix of pride and despair bubbling within me. "I don't know if I can be helped." Grace stood up, her silhouette framed by the light. "You helped me find my way once, remember? It's time to return the favor." I looked at her, at the determination etched on her face, and for a moment I wanted to let her in, to let her pull me out of this pit. But the doubt was stronger, a relentless tide, pulling me further from the shore of my once unshakable beliefs. She sighed, a sound filled with years of wisdom and patience. "I'll be here, Eli, whenever you're ready." And with that, she left, leaving me to grapple with the shadows that clung to my spirit. I sat there for hours, the community center's life buzzing around me while I remained still, a statue of defeat and confusion. By the time I left the office, the sun had sunk low, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to reach out for me. As I walked the familiar streets home, every laugh and smile from passers-by felt like an accusation, a reminder of the joy I could no longer grasp. I found myself at the door of my apartment, the key heavy in my hand. Inside, the quiet was deafening, a clear-cut difference to the vibrant life I used to lead. The pictures on the walls, the books on the shelves, they all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the battle within me raged on. The calling I had once felt so strongly to help and heal now seemed like a path leading nowhere, and I wondered if it was time to step off, to admit defeat and let go of the faith that had once been my Chapter 5, Night of the Soul. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, casting a dim silver light through my bedroom window. The clock on my bedside table ticked away, a reminder that while the world slept, I was caught in a battle with my own thoughts. My faith, once a bright flame within me, flickered in the dark, threatening to go out. I rolled over in bed, the sheets twisted around me, a physical manifestation of the turmoil in my mind. Sleep eluded me, each tick of the clock a hammer against the walls of my troubled thoughts. My mind wandered to my childhood, to the small, cramped apartment where I grew up. I could almost see the faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, smell the scent of old books that my mother piled in every nook. She was a woman of strong faith, her hardiness a towering force amidst our struggles. "Eli," she would say, her voice a soft melody in the chaos of our lives. "Remember, we are more than our troubles. We are not defined by what we lack, but by the strength we find in moments of hardship." Her words echoed in my head, now a haunting whisper in the silence. Was I finding strength, or was I losing myself in this abyss? I turned to face the ceiling, the shadows there dancing like specters of doubt. I slipped out of bed, restless energy propelling me to pace the confines of my small living room. The memories continued to flood in, unbidden. I saw myself as a boy, sitting in the back of the church, my mother's hand warm in mine, her presence an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. "Faith is our compass, Eli," she would say. "It will guide you through the darkest nights." But now I felt directionless, my compass spinning wildly, no true north to be found. The night crept on, the hours stretching out before me. I found myself at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea cooling before me. I yearned for the certainty I once had, the unwavering belief that each step I took was part of a greater plan. What if I was wrong? What if all the guidance I'd offered, all the hope I'd instilled in others, was built on a foundation of sand? The silence of the night was heavy, a blanket that smothered my cries for clarity. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, the weight of my fading faith and sense of inadequacy a crushing force. Then, in the stillness, a memory surfaced, a day when my mother and I had nothing but a loaf of bread to share. We had sat at this very table, and she had smiled, her eyes bright. "Eli, we have each other, and we have hope. That's all we need," she had said, breaking the bread. Her strength, her unwavering hope in the face of hardship, became a signal in my night of the soul. I realized that my struggles, my doubts, were part of the journey, just as much as the moments of triumph. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, a sense of calm settled over me. My faith might be tested, my path uncertain, but I was not alone. I carried with me the legacy of my mother's hardiness, the echoes of her faith in the face of adversity. I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would, but as the new day began, I knew that the struggle within me was not a sign of failure, but a record to my humanity. With a weary but determined heart, I decided to face the coming day, not with the assurance of faith, but with the courage to confront my doubts and continue the search for my purpose within these sacred walls. Chapter 6: Crossroads. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the bustling streets of our town as I made my way to the local coffee shop. The air was filled with the scent of roasted beans and the sound of casual chatter. I was about to push open the door when a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. "Eli? Elijah Brooks, is that you?" The voice was deep and coated with a hint of surprise. Turning, I found myself face to face with Michael, an old friend whose life journey had taken a much different route than mine. His hair, once as dark as the midnight sky, now had streaks of gray running through it, and the years had etched lines of experience onto his face. "Michael, it's been ages," I exclaimed, the surprise in my voice matching his. He grinned, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Let's grab a cup of coffee. We've got a lot to catch up on." Inside, the coffee shop was cozy, with mismatched chairs and local artwork adorning the walls. We settled into a corner booth, the worn leather cushions sighing beneath us. The air was a symphony of clinking cups and the barista's calls. "So what's been going on with you?" Michael asked, his gaze steady and curious. I hesitated, the weight of my struggles pressing down on me. "Well, it's been complicated. I've found myself at a sort of crossroads with my faith." Michael listened as I poured out my heart, sharing the turmoil that had been brewing within me. He nodded thoughtfully, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the wooden table. "Eli, I've been there," he said, his voice a blend of empathy and resolve. "A few years back, I hit rock bottom. I thought all hope was lost, but in that despair I found a spark of something that led me back to a place of hope. I leaned in, my interest piqued despite my doubts. How did you find your way out of that?" He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "It wasn't easy. It took a lot of soul-searching and some tough realizations. I had to accept that my understanding of faith needed to change, to grow. It wasn't about following a strict set of rules, but about finding a connection, something personal and real. His words resonated with me, stirring something that I thought had been lost. You think I can find that too? Absolutely, Michael said with a reassuring smile. It's not about choosing between succumbing to doubt or clinging to old beliefs. It's about forging a new path, one that's true to who you are now. We talked for hours, the conversation meandering through memories of the past and hopes for the future. Michael shared stories of his own struggles and triumphs, each one a witness to the human spirit's capacity for flexibility. As the sky outside turned to dusky hues, I felt a shift within me. The crossroads I stood at didn't seem so daunting anymore. Michael's journey, his testimony of finding hope when all seemed lost, lit a lantern of possibility in the fog of my doubts. We parted ways with a hearty handshake and a promise to keep in touch. As I walked home, the air cooling with the onset of evening, I felt a sense of purpose stirring within me. Michael's visit had been unexpected, but it was the catalyst I needed to confront my path. I might still be wrestling with my faith, but I was no longer floundering in the dark. There was light ahead, a path to forge, and a new understanding of faith to be discovered. My journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to take the next step. Chapter 7: The Conviction. The First Light Community Church stood tall against the backdrop of a clear blue sky as I trudged up the steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and a faint hint of lilies from the flower arrangements that adorned the altar. I slipped into the meeting room, where a circle of chairs awaited, each one filled with familiar faces from the congregation. The meeting was about to begin, a routine gathering that suddenly felt like a court about to pass judgment. "Morning, Eli," Pastor John greeted, his warm tone not quite reaching his eyes. "Morning," I replied, my voice almost a whisper, as I took a seat among the others. The discussion started, focusing on the upcoming community events, but I could barely concentrate. The voices around me seemed to blend into a distant hum, my mind preoccupied with the turmoil inside. Grace, sitting to my right, gave me a concerned glance, but I offered only a tight smile in return. The talks turned to the topic of faith and commitment, and without warning, I found myself in the center of attention. "Eli, you've been quiet," Pastor John noted, his gaze locking with mine. "What are your thoughts on our role in fostering faith within the community?" The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I cleared my throat, trying to find the words. "Well, I think, sometimes, faith is like walking through a fog. You know there's a path, but it's hard to see. We have to trust that we're heading in the right direction, even when it's not clear." A murmur rippled through the group, and I could feel their gazes turn from curious to probing. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. "Are you saying you're unsure of your path, Eli?" Mrs. Henderson, a silver-haired lady with a penchant for speaking her mind, asked pointedly. My cheeks grew warm under their scrutiny. "I'm just saying that doubt is part of the journey. It's human to question, to seek." Pastor John nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. "It's true that we all face our trials, but we must always cling to our faith." The words hung in the air, a veiled challenge to my wavering spirit. The meeting carried on, but I felt disconnected, as if I were no longer part of the circle, but an outsider looking in. After the meeting, I hurried out, the whispers of the congregation trailing behind me. The bright day seemed to mock my inner darkness as I walked home, my thoughts a stormy sea. At home, I stood before the mirror and hardly recognized the weary face staring back. My eyes, once full of determination, now reflected the exhaustion of sleepless nights and relentless self-questioning. Over the next few days, I felt my energy wane, my appetite diminish. Work became a struggle, each session with the kids a reminder of the conviction I once held so dearly, now slipping through my fingers like sand. One evening, as I tried to muster the strength to prepare a simple meal, I caught the concerned look from my neighbor through the window. I realized then that my internal battle was no longer a secret guarded within these sacred walls, but a spectacle for all to see. I sank into a chair, the reality of my situation settling heavy on my shoulders. The struggle within had begun to take its toll, not just on my spirit, but on my body as well. Sleep was elusive that night, and as I lay in the quiet of my room, I wondered if there was a way back to the certainty I once knew, or if I was destined to wander in this desert of doubt, forever searching for an oasis just beyond reach. Chapter 8: Temptation's Edge. The evening sky was a swirl of purples and oranges as I found myself wandering the streets of my childhood neighborhood. Old brick buildings, their edges softened by time, stood as silent witnesses to the countless footsteps that had echoed down these sidewalks. I stopped in front of the corner store, its neon sign flickering like a buoy of past temptations. It was here, amidst the candy racks and dusty shelves, where I once sought solace in things I shouldn't have. A shiver ran through me, not from the chill in the air, but from the gnawing emptiness that had taken residence in my chest. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of tobacco and worn leather wrapping around me. Ely, the store owner, Mr. Peterson, peered at me from behind the counter, his bushy eyebrows lifting in recognition. "Hey, Mr. Peterson," I said, forcing a smile. His gruff exterior was unchanged, like the countless rows of products that lined the shelves. "What brings you back here?" he asked, his voice a gravelly tune of curiosity. "Just walking," I replied, my gaze drifting to the corner where I used to stand, pockets heavy with choices I now regretted. "You look like you could use a friend," Mr. Peterson remarked, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. I chuckled, a hollow sound. "Yeah, maybe." As I turned to leave, my eyes caught a glimpse of something that once had a strong hold on me. The temptation whispered, promising a momentary escape from the relentless ache in my soul. I stood there, frozen, caught in a battle between the man I was and the man I was striving to be. The edge of temptation was a cliff, and I was teetering dangerously close to the abyss. "Thinking about old habits, huh?" Mr. Peterson's voice cut through my reverie. It crossed my mind, I admitted. He leaned on the counter, his expression softening. "We've all been there, Eli. It's what you do next that counts." Stepping out into the cooling air, I made my way to the community center, where I knew Grace would be tidying up after the evening activities. The center was quiet, the laughter and chatter of the day's events hanging in the memory of the walls. Grace was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters with a vigor that belied her years. She looked up, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that spoke volumes. "Eli, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice a lifeline in the stillness. I hesitated, then the words tumbled out. I was at the corner store. The temptation to fall back into old ways was there, staring me in the face. Grace set down her cloth, her face a canvas of empathy. Temptation's a sly creature. It knows when we're weak, when we're hurting. I sank into a chair, the weight of her words hitting me. "How do you do it, Grace? How do you resist?" She pulled up a chair opposite me, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Years back, I had my own demons to face. It wasn't easy, but I realized something important. Each time I said no, I was saying yes to a better future, to a better me. I leaned forward, her conviction reaching me like a buoy through the fog. "But how do you find the strength?" "You find it in places like this." She gestured around the empty center, in the faces of those we help, in the belief that we're meant for more than our mistakes. Her story, her unwavering resolve, stirred something within me. I stood up, my decision solidifying with her words. The temptation that had seemed so alluring now appeared for what it truly was, a mirage, a fleeting promise of relief that would leave me with nothing but regret. "Thank you, Grace," I said, feeling a newfound determination coursing through me. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "We all stand at temptation's edge at some point, Eli. Remember, it's not the fall that defines us, but the choice to step back and walk a different path." With Grace's wisdom echoing in my heart, I left the community center with a sense of clarity. The night no longer seemed as oppressive, and the path ahead, though uncertain, felt like it was mine to claim. The struggle within me was far from over, but I had taken a step back from the edge, back onto solid ground where I could stand tall and face the dawn. Chapter 9: Echoes of the Past. The old neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same narrow streets snaked through the heart of the community. The houses stood shoulder to shoulder like tired soldiers, and the corner store still had that neon sign buzzing in the window. But today, the past felt closer than ever, As I stood in front of the house where I'd grown up, its paint faded and the front steps cracked. I felt Grace's presence behind me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. "You ready for this, Eli?" she asked, her voice a steady presence. "Yeah, I think so," I replied, though my heart raced like a trapped bird in my chest. We walked up to the front door, the wood worn from years of harsh weather and slamming doors. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Grace gave me an encouraging nod, and with a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, a mix of old wood and dust, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for me to return. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, the couch worn and threadbare. Mom used to sit right there. I pointed to a faded armchair by the window, reading her Bible every morning. Grace moved closer, inspecting the chair. "She sounds like she was a strong woman." I nodded, memories flooding back. She was. Even when things got tough, she never let her faith waver. We walked through the house, each room echoing with the ghosts of laughter and arguments, birthdays and quiet nights. We reached my old room, the walls now bare, where posters and dreams once hung. It was here I began, my voice barely a whisper, right in this room, where I made some of the biggest mistakes of my life. The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy with regret. Grace listened as I recounted the night that had changed everything, the night I let anger and hurt drive me to decisions that I'd carried like chains around my neck ever since. "That's a heavy burden to bear, Eli," Grace said softly after I finished. "But you're not that kid anymore. You've grown. You've helped so many." I shook my head, the weight of my past pressing down on me. But what if I can't move on? What if I can't forgive myself? She took my hands in hers, her grip firm. "Forgiving ourselves can be the hardest thing, Eli. But it's also the most important step towards healing. You've got to forgive yourself and those who've hurt you." I looked into her eyes, finding a well of understanding there. "How do I start?" "By letting go," she said. "By accepting that we can't change the past, but we can shape our future." We left my childhood home, the door closing with a finality that felt like an end and a beginning. As we walked back through the streets, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Grace's words had taken root, and I knew the journey ahead would be long, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed I could make it. The echoes of the past might always linger, but they would no longer define me. With each step, I felt the chains of regret loosening, giving way to the possibility of a new path, one where I could forgive and be forgiven. The road to redemption wasn't straight or easy, but it was mine to walk, and I was ready to take the first step. Chapter 10: The Broken Chain. The morning air was brisk as I made my way down the familiar, yet somehow foreign, path to my sister's house. It was a modest one-story building with faded blue paint and a small porch that creaked with every step. The garden, once Mom's pride and joy, was now a tangle of overgrown weeds and forgotten blooms. I raised my hand to knock on the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. It had been years since we last spoke. The rift that formed between us seemed as wide as a canyon now, but it was time to build a bridge. The door swung open, and there stood my sister Lila, her once bright eyes now shaded with the same weariness I saw in my own reflection each morning. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and she wore a faded apron that had seen better days. "Elijah?" she said, surprise etching her features. "What are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, my voice steady, though my insides were a jumbled mess. "I came to talk, Lila. I want to fix things between us." She hesitated, a frown creasing her forehead, then stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the house was cozy, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of a distant radio. We settled at the kitchen table, the wood worn smooth by countless family meals. "Why now?" Lila asked, folding her arms across her chest. I looked down at my hands, then met her gaze. "I'm trying to make peace with the past, with our past." Lila's expression softened for a moment, but then hardened again. "Eli, you left. You left me here to deal with everything. How can we just pretend that didn't happen?" Her words stung, but she was right. I had left, chasing my own demons, leaving her to shoulder burdens that should have been shared. "I'm sorry, Lila. Truly, I am. I was wrong and I can't change that. But I'm here now." We talked for hours, unearthing the pain and resentment that had festered over the years. At times, her words were like daggers, slicing through any defense I could muster. It was clear the chain of our shared history was broken, each link a memory that had turned sour. When the conversation reached its peak, voices raised and tears shed, I knew this was a wound that wouldn't heal easily. We were like two people speaking different languages, struggling to find common ground. As I left her house, the door closing with a quiet click behind me, I felt a mixture of hope and heartache. The path to reconciliation was not a straight one, and I was learning that some chains might never be fully mended. I found myself at Grace's door later that day, seeking the solace of her wisdom. She welcomed me in, her small living room a haven of comfort with its plush couches and the soft hum of a ceiling fan. "Eli, tell me what's on your heart," she said, pouring us both a cup of tea. I recounted the confrontation with Lila, the way our words seemed to build walls rather than bridges. Grace listened, her eyes never leaving mine. "Forgiveness is a journey, Eli," she said once I'd finished. "It's not just one act, but many, over and over. And sometimes it's not the other person we need to forgive, but ourselves." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. How do I start? By letting go of what you cannot change, and by taking responsibility for what you can, she replied. I nodded, understanding what she meant. The broken chain of my family's history might never be whole again, but I could forge a new link, one of forgiveness and hope for the future. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the bridges I needed to build, both with Lila and within myself. The road ahead was daunting, but I was no longer navigating it alone. With each step toward forgiveness, I was slowly freeing myself from the chains of the past, ready to write a new chapter within these sacred walls. Chapter 11, Rising from Ruins. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of my small living room, casting a warm glow on the dusty shelves filled with old books and trinkets from a time that now felt like someone else's life. I sat on the edge of the couch, a faded photograph of me and my sister Lila in my hands, the edges curled and the colors washed out. Today felt different, like I stood on the edge of something new. I had spent so many nights wrestling with shadows, but now it was time to step into the light, to rebuild from the ground up. A knock on the door roused me from my thoughts. I tucked the photograph in my shirt pocket and stood up to answer. Grace stood on the doorstep, her face etched with lines of kindness and years of wisdom. "Eli," she greeted, "I was thinking about you. How are you holding up?" I opened the door wider to let her in. "I'm at a turning point, Grace. I'm ready to let go of the old and build something new." She nodded, settling into the armchair across from me. "And how do you plan on doing that?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to start by getting rid of the things that tie me to the past. I want to make room for new memories, new beliefs." Grace listened, her eyes reflecting a quiet pride. "That's a brave step, Eli. What brought this on?" I shared with her the journey I'd been on, the conversations with Leela, the long nights of soul-searching, and the moment I realized holding on to the ruins of my past was keeping me from the future I deserved. "It's like I've been carrying around these bricks," I explained. "Every mistake, every regret, piling them up until I couldn't carry them anymore." Grace leaned forward, her hands clasped. "So what will you do with those bricks?" I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in a long while. "I'll use them to pave a new path, one that leads to hope and healing." We spent the afternoon sorting through the clutter of my home. Each object I decided to part with felt like shedding a layer of the old me. We filled boxes with clothes I no longer wore, books I'd outgrown, and mementos that no longer served a purpose. As the last box was sealed, Grace placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You've done well, Eli. How do you feel?" I looked around the now spacious room, the walls bare and ready for new memories. "Lighter," I said, "like I've been holding my breath and I can finally breathe." Grace gave me a warm hug, her presence a comforting embrace. "I've seen you grow so much, Eli. You've come a long way from the man who first walked through the doors of the church seeking solace." Her words settled in my heart, a confirmation that my efforts were not in vain. "Thanks to you, Grace. You've been my guiding star through this all." She gave a soft chuckle, "Just doing what I can. But remember, the real work, the hardest work, that's all you." As the day drew to a close, Grace and I stood on my front porch, the boxes destined for donation at our feet. She looked at me, her eyes shining with something that looked a lot like hope. "Eli," she said, "you're rising from the ruins of your past. And I have no doubt that what you build next will be even stronger, because you've laid the foundation with honesty, courage, and a willingness to change." I watched her walk down the steps, her figure strong despite her age. Turning back to the threshold of my home, I felt the truth of her words. I was no longer defined by the ruins of what once was, but by the possibilities of what could be. The conflicts within me hadn't vanished, but they no longer controlled me. I was ready to embrace a new purpose, to forge a faith that was all my own. With a heart full of resolve, I stepped back inside, ready to fill the empty spaces with new dreams, new hopes, and a new journey within these sacred walls. Chapter 12: The Abyss. The community center's gym was usually a place where echoes of bouncing balls and children's laughter filled the air. But today, it was silent. I sat alone on the polished wooden bleachers, the dim overhead lights casting long shadows across the court. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one a piercing reminder of the faith and purpose that seemed to slip further from my grasp with every passing moment. I was supposed to be coaching the kids' basketball team today. They would be looking to me for guidance, for encouragement, but what could I give them when I felt so empty inside? The door to the gym creaked open, and in walked Marcus, the lanky teenager I had come to know well. His eyebrows were knitted together in concern as he approached me. "Coach Eli, you missed practice yesterday, and today you're just sitting here all quiet. What's up?" Marcus's voice echoed in the vast space, pulling me back from the edge of my own dark thoughts. I forced a smile, though it felt like wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "Just thinking, Marcus. About life and stuff." He sat down beside me, the wooden planks creaking under us. "You always say life's like a game of basketball. Gotta keep your eyes on the goal, right?" I let out a sigh, the metaphor feeling hollow now. "Yeah, but what if you can't even see the hoop anymore?" Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. "Then maybe it's time to pass the ball. Let someone else take the shot for a while." His words, simple and honest, struck a chord, but the heaviness within me was like a black hole, sucking away any semblance of light. "It's like I've been abandoned, Marcus, like God's turned his back on me," I confessed, the words raw and exposed. Marcus shook his head, his eyes wide. "Nah, coach, I don't believe that. You're the one who's always telling us to have faith." I stood up, feeling a sudden urge to flee, to escape the weight of expectations and the gaze of the boy who still believed in me. "Faith isn't enough sometimes, Marcus." Before he could reply, I was out the door, the sound of my footsteps a dull thud against the polished floor. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, trapped in a place filled with memories of better days. The air outside was crisp, the sky a blanket of clouds threatening rain. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts a tangled mess, when suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Grace. "Eli, where are you? Something's telling me you're in trouble." I stopped in my tracks, her intuition sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm just out for a walk, Grace. Come to my place, please. We need to talk." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Against the tide of despair, I found myself drawn to her request, to the one person who seemed to understand the darkness that enveloped me. I made my way to her house, each step feeling like a march towards an unknown fate. Grace was waiting at the door, her expression a mix of worry and resolve. She ushered me inside, to the familiar warmth of her living room, where countless conversations had taken place. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she made 2 cups of tea, setting one before me as I slumped into the couch. "Eli, talk to me. What happened?" I took a sip of the hot tea, feeling it warm me from the inside, a stark difference to the coldness in my heart. "I feel lost, Grace, like I'm shouting into an abyss and there's no one there to hear me." Grace sat down, her hands wrapped around her own cup. "You're not alone, Eli. You never have been, but you've got to reach out, let others help you through this." I nodded, the tears I'd been holding back now blurring my vision. "I don't know if I can make it back this time, Grace." She reached out, taking my hand, her grip strong. "You can, and you will. You've been through storms before, Eli. Remember who you are and who's walking with you, even when you can't see him." Her words were a lifeline, a faint glimmer of hope in the engulfing gloom. I clung to them, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could rise from this abyss and find my way back to the light. As the afternoon faded into evening, Grace and I talked, her presence a steady force against the chaos of my thoughts. She didn't have all the answers, but she offered me something invaluable, the belief that no matter how deep the abyss, there was always a way out, as long as I was willing to take the first step. Chapter 13, Seeking the Light. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. It was late, and the only light came from a small lamp on the table, casting a warm circle in the darkness. I sat there, alone, a notebook in front of me, filled with thoughts and questions that had been swirling in my head for too long. I thought back to the times when Grace would talk to me. Her words always seemed to make things clearer. She wasn't here now, but her teachings echoed in my mind, guiding me like the stars guide travelers on a dark night. I remembered one thing she said: "Eli, the answers you seek are like seeds planted deep within you. Give them time, and they will grow towards the light." I held on to that thought as I picked up my pen and started to write. What am I missing? I asked the empty room, hoping somewhere inside me there was an answer. Just then, the phone rang. I picked it up and heard the voice of Marcus, the worry clear even through the crackling line. "Eli, you haven't been around. We're all missing you at the center. Are you okay?" I hesitated, then replied, "I'm searching for something, Marcus. Something important." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "Is it something we can help with? You've always been there for us. Maybe we can be there for you now." I closed my eyes and sighed. It's something I have to find on my own. "But thank you, Marcus. That means a lot." He seemed to understand, and we talked a bit more about the team and how they were doing before saying goodnight. I hung up, feeling a bit less alone. With the phone back in its cradle, I turned to the notebook again. I wrote down my thoughts, fears, and hopes, trying to make sense of the swirling emotions and questions that had been my constant companions. Why do I feel so lost? I wrote. The pen moved almost on its own, driven by a force that seemed to come from somewhere deep within me. I filled pages with words, some clear and some scribbled out, a map of my inner world that was slowly taking shape. As the night wore on, a sense of calm started to settle over me. The act of writing, of pouring out everything that was inside me, felt like a cleansing. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the first light of dawn was creeping through the window. The notebook lay open on my lap, the last thing I wrote staring back at me. Faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about being okay with the questions. A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't a full answer, but it was a start. Maybe this was what Grace meant by seeds growing towards the light. Maybe this was the beginning of understanding, of coming to terms with not knowing, and finding peace in that. As the sun rose higher, filling the room with daylight, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if the darkness of the night had been a cocoon, and now I was ready to emerge, not with all the answers, but with a newfound willingness to seek the light, wherever it may lead. The notebook was now filled with the echoes of my soul's search, a proof to the journey I had embarked on. With Grace's wisdom as my guide, I felt ready to face the world outside, no longer as a man lost in the dark, but as one who seeks the light. Chapter 14, The Awakening. The church was packed, a sea of faces all turned toward the front, where Pastor John stood with his arms raised high, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of his sermon. I was there, in my usual spot at the back, the wooden pew hard beneath me. But today, something felt different as I listened. I glanced around and caught sight of Mama Grace in her usual spot near the front, her hands clasped together, her eyes closed in deep concentration. She always believed in me, even when I stumbled and lost my way. As the sun streamed through the stained glass windows, splashing the room with a kaleidoscope of colors, Pastor John's words suddenly cut through the fog that had clouded my mind for so long. And it is in our moments of doubt that we must look within and find the light that never fades, he said. His words struck a chord deep within me, echoing like the toll of a bell in a quiet night. I felt something stir inside, a flicker of something that had been dormant for too long. It was as if the very air in the church had shifted, becoming charged with a new energy. After the service, I found myself walking up to Pastor John, something I hadn't done in quite a while. His eyes were kind, a smile on his face as he greeted me. "Eli, what brings you forward today?" he asked, his voice gentle. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out of me. "I felt something during your sermon, Pastor. A moment of peace, like the sun breaking through the clouds after a storm. I think I'm starting to see my path again." Pastor John placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's the spirit moving within you, Eli. It's always been there, even when you couldn't feel it." We talked for a long time, the church emptying around us until it was just the two of us, surrounded by the quiet hum of the building. Our conversation was a river, flowing from my doubts to my hopes, from my fears to my newfound clarity. As I left the church that day, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I found Mama Grace waiting for me outside, her knowing smile telling me she had sensed the change before I had even spoken a word. "Eli," she said, her voice rich with emotion, "I knew this day would come. You found your way back." I nodded, unable to find the words to match what I was feeling. "Thank you, Grace," I said finally. "Your belief in me, it helped me believe in myself again." She hugged me, a strong, enveloping embrace that felt like coming home. We all lose sight of the shore from time to time, Eli. What matters is finding your way back to it. As I walked home, the sun warm on my face, I realized that this was my turning point. The moment of clarity in the church was more than just a fleeting sensation. It was the beginning of my transformation. My faith felt renewed, personal, and alive in a way it had never been before. The consequences of my actions, the pain I had caused, and the people I had let down, they were all still there, but now I felt ready to face them, to make amends, and to move forward. It was as if I had been asleep for a long time, and I was finally awake, ready to live with my eyes wide open and my heart full of hope. Chapter 15, Rebirth. The sun, a golden disk in the sky, watched over the town as I made my way to the community center. With each step, I could feel the solid ground beneath my feet, a reminder of the stability I was starting to find within myself. The center was buzzing with activity when I arrived. The bright walls, adorned with kids' artwork and motivational posters, seemed to welcome me back. I spotted Marcus shooting hoops in the gym, the ball bouncing rhythmically against the polished floor. "Hey, Marcus," I called out, my voice echoing in the large space. He turned, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Eli, you're back, man." He jogged over, the basketball tucked under his arm. "Yeah, I am," I replied, feeling a genuine smile on my face. "I've missed this place." We sat on the bleachers and I shared with him my recent journey, the struggles and the moment of clarity that had changed everything for me. "So, what's the game plan now, Coach?" Marcus asked, his eyes curious. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "I'm going to fix what's broken, starting with my relationships and my role here." Marcus nodded, his gaze showing a newfound respect. "That's cool, Eli. Real cool." I spent the rest of the day at the center, talking with the staff and the kids, immersing myself in the community that I had once felt so disconnected from. I apologized where I needed to and listened with a new understanding to the stories and hopes shared with me. Later, I found myself at Lila's door again, my heart beating fast in my chest. She answered with a cautious look, but when she saw the determination in my eyes, her expression softened. "Lila, I want to make things right," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to rebuild, not just for me, but for us." We talked for what seemed like hours, unraveling the knots of our past and carefully laying the foundations for a new beginning. It wasn't easy, and the hurt was still there, but we both knew it was a start. The following Sunday, I stood in the church, the light filtering through stained glass painting the congregation in a rainbow of colors. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Grace, sitting beside me, leaned in. "You're doing good, Eli. I'm proud of you." "Thanks to you, Grace. You've been my anchor," I whispered back. Pastor John's sermon that day spoke of transformation and the impact one person's change of heart could have on those around them. His words seemed to mirror my own journey. After the service, people came up to me, their words kind and encouraging. "You're an inspiration, Eli," they said, and I could see it in their eyes. They meant it. As the day drew to a close, I walked through the town, my town, with a sense of belonging. The familiar streets, the shops, and the faces around me were all part of my story, a story that was still being written. I had started the day as a man who had once lost his way, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I knew that I had found my path again. I was reborn, not as someone new, but as the truest version of myself, ready to face the world and make a difference in whatever small ways I could. Chapter 16, Choosing the Path. The morning found me sitting at the kitchen table, the sun casting a warm glow through the window, turning my cup of coffee into a small cauldron of golden light. Today was a big day, and I knew it. The decision had been resting in my heart, growing firmer with each passing moment. I headed to the church early, the place that had been both my sanctuary and battleground. The wooden doors opened with a familiar creak, a sound that no longer made me flinch, but welcomed me into its embrace. Inside, the pews stood in perfect rows, like old friends waiting to hear what I had to say. I walked down the aisle, each step a voucher to the journey that had brought me here. Grace was already there, her presence a illuminator of calm in the sea of my uncertainty. "Eli, you look like you've made up your mind," she noted, reading my expression with ease. "Yeah, Grace, I have," I replied, taking a seat beside her. The church began to fill, the hum of quiet conversations blending with the rustling of hymnals and the soft footsteps on the carpet. Pastor John gave me an encouraging nod from across the room. It was time. Standing at the front, with all eyes on me, I took a deep breath. "Friends, I've been walking a rocky path filled with twists and shadows," I began, my voice steady, "but I've come to a place where the road splits, and I've chosen my path." Murmurs rippled through the congregation, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "I choose the path of eternal life," I continued, "not just in the hereafter, but here, now, in how I live my days, in the love I give, the service I render, and the faith I hold." Grace's smile from the front pew was like a sunrise, chasing away the last remnants of night. Some faces in the crowd mirrored her support, while others held the skeptical lift of an eyebrow or the furrowed brow of doubt. "I know this choice is not without its trials," I said, locking eyes with those whose skepticism was clear. "But my decision is made. I'm resolute." After the service, as the congregation filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or clap my shoulder. "We're with you, Eli," some said. Others remained silent, their skepticism still a barrier between us. Grace lingered, waiting until the last person had left. "Eli, your declaration today, it's powerful. You're embracing the truths you've discovered, and whether everyone supports you or not, it's the fruits of your trials that matter." Her words wrapped around me, fortifying my resolve. "Thanks, Grace. I know the road won't be easy, but I feel ready to walk it, with all its ups and downs." She hugged me, and I felt the strength of her belief in me. "You found your path, Eli. Now, all that's left is to walk it, one step at a time." As I left the church, the sun high in the sky, I felt a sense of purpose fueling my steps. The path I had chosen was my own, guided by the spiritual truths that now beat in rhythm with my heart. There would be trials, yes, but I was ready to face them head on, knowing that with each step, I was moving closer to the life I was meant to lead. Chapter 17, The Path of Healing. The morning at First Light Community Church was alive with the sounds of folks gathering, the wooden pews filled with a sense of anticipation. I stood at the front, no longer just a part of the congregation, but someone they looked to for guidance. It was a new feeling, one I was still getting used to. Grace caught my eye from where she sat, a soft smile on her face. It was clear she was giving me space to grow, stepping back so I could find my own way to lead. As people settled in, I noticed a young man I hadn't seen before sitting towards the back, his eyes searching the room with a kind of quiet desperation I recognized all too well. I made my way over to him before the service began. "Hi there, I'm Ely," I said, extending my hand. "Is this your first time here?" The young man looked up, a bit startled. "Yeah, it is." "I'm Alex," he replied, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, but I could feel the tremble in his fingers. "What brings you in today?" I asked, my tone friendly, inviting. Alex hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Honestly, I'm looking for some kind of direction, I guess. Life's been rough lately." I nodded, understanding all too well I've been there. "Sometimes it feels like we're walking through a fog, huh?" "You can say that again," Alex agreed with a weak chuckle. We talked more, my words coming from a place of experience, of empathy. I shared a bit of my own journey, how I'd found my way through the fog to where I was now. As the service started, Pastor John's message about healing and growth seemed to speak directly to us. Alex listened intently, his eyes not leaving the pastor. After the service, we continued our conversation. "You think there's really a way through all this mess?" Alex asked, a hopeful note in his voice. "There is," I assured him. "It's not quick, and it's not easy, but there's a path for everyone." Grace joined us, her presence always a comfort. "Eli's right, Alex, and you've taken the first step just by being here today." As Alex left, he turned back to me. "Thanks, Eli. I'll be back next week." Watching him go, I felt a wave of gratitude fill me. I was helping someone else find their way, just as Grace had helped me. Turning to Grace, I saw the pride in her eyes. "You did good, Eli. You're finding your stride. I couldn't have done it without you," I told her. She patted my hand, a gesture that spoke volumes. "You're ready to walk this path on your own now, Eli, and I'll always be here, cheering you on." That night, I lay in bed reflecting on the day. The path of healing was long and winding, but I was on it, not just for myself, but for others too. With each step, I was growing stronger, more unbreakable. The challenges were still there, but now I faced them with a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment that fueled my journey forward. The path wasn't just mine anymore. It was a trail I was blazing for all those who felt lost, a route marked by hope and the promise of healing within these sacred walls. Chapter 18, Conquering Shadows. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I gazed outside where the sky was a canvas of soft twilight colors. The day had been long, but I wasn't tired. My mind was alive with thoughts about the fears that used to have a hold on me. I heard a gentle knock and walked to the door. There stood Grace, her eyes kind and knowing. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. "Of course not," I replied, leading her to the small living room. We sat down, and she looked at me with an expectant smile. "You've got that look about you, Eli, like you're ready to face down a giant." I chuckled, the sound more confident than it would have been months ago. "More like a shadow, Grace, the shadows of my past." Her head tilted slightly. "Those can be the most fearsome giants of all." "Yeah, but I'm ready to conquer them," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of praying, and I feel like it's time to let go of those fears, to forgive." Grace's hand found mine, a supportive squeeze. "Forgiveness is a powerful thing, Eli. It's the key that unlocks so many chains." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "I want to start with Dad. I've been holding on to anger for too long, and it's been eating away at me." Grace listened as I poured out the old hurts, the misunderstandings, and the silence that had grown between me and my father. Each word lifted a little of the weight I'd been carrying. "You're going to talk to him?" she asked after I finished. "I am." "Tomorrow," I said, a sense of certainty settling in my chest. The next day, I stood at my father's doorstep, the old wooden frame familiar under my hand. I knocked and waited, my heart thumping loud in my ears. The door opened, and there stood my father, his face lined with the years, his eyes a mirror of my own. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Eli," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Come in, son." We sat at the kitchen table, an old oak that had seen better days, just like us. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "Dad, I came here to say I forgive you for everything." He looked at me, his eyes widening. "Eli, No, let me finish, please," I interrupted, needing to get this out. "I've realized that holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal. I'm the one who gets burned. I want to move past that. I want us to move past that." We talked for a long time, the years of silence unraveling as we shared and listened to each other. It wasn't easy, but as I left his house, I felt lighter, like I had conquered the biggest shadow of them all. Grace was waiting for me outside the church when I returned. "How did it go?" she asked, although I think she already knew. "It went well, Grace." "Really well," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "I feel free." She beamed at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Eli, you've done it. You found your way through the darkness." As the sun set, casting long shadows behind us, I realized those shadows no longer held any power over me. I had faced them, conquered them, and now I was ready to step into the light of my new path, my heart full of hope and my spirit free. Grace had been right beside me, guiding me to this moment, and now, as her student, I had finally graduated. Chapter 19, Self-Discovery. The morning light filtered through the colorful panes of the community church, casting a mosaic of hues onto the faces of those gathered. I stood at the pulpit, my heart full and my mind clear. Before me was my congregation, my friends, my fellow travelers on this journey of life. "Good morning, everyone," I started, my voice echoing gently off the high ceilings. "Today I want to talk to you about self-discovery, about the winding roads we all walk." A sea of attentive faces gazed back at me, some with smiles, others with the earnest look of those searching for something. I caught Grace's eye. She gave a subtle nod, encouraging me to continue. "You know, I've come to see that life, it's a lot like the old oak tree that stands in the park," I said, gesturing with my hands to paint the picture. "It's strong, it's sturdy, but it's not perfect. It's got knots and gnarls and some branches that don't bear leaves." A young woman in the front, Sarah, who always had a curious spirit, tilted her head and asked, "But Eli, isn't it the imperfections that make the tree and us unique?" "You're exactly right, Sarah," I replied, grateful for her insight. "It's in embracing our imperfections where we find our true beauty, our true strength. It's in the knots and the gnarls where our character is formed." A murmur of agreement rippled through the congregation. I took a deep breath and dove deeper into my message. "I've learned that the choices we make, they shape us. Some lead us straight, others take us on detours, but they're all part of our story," I continued. "And today I stand before you, grateful for every twist and turn, for they've brought me to this moment of peace and understanding." I paused, looking out at the congregation, their faces a tapestry of life's disparate experiences. I want to share that it's okay to be human, to falter, to not have all the answers. What's important is that we keep moving forward, keep learning, and keep growing. Old Mr. Thompson, sitting in his usual spot by the window, raised his voice. "Eli, son, your journey's been an inspiration. Makes me believe it's never too late to start walking a new path." His words warmed my heart. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It means a lot coming from you. And you're right, it's never too late for any of us." As the service came to an end, people came forward, sharing their stories, their hopes, and their struggles. Each conversation was a thread in the fabric of our shared humanity, and as I listened, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection. Grace approached me, her eyes brimming with pride. "Eli, your words today, they've touched hearts. You've opened up a space for healing, for acceptance." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "We're all in this together, Grace, and if my journey can light the way for even one person, then it's all been worth it." The church slowly emptied, leaving me with a sense of accomplishment and contentment. My journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet. There were still many roads to walk, many lessons to learn, but I was ready for them, armed with a newfound self-understanding, a heart full of gratitude, and a community that stood with me. As I locked the church doors behind me, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the world. I knew that with each sunrise and each sunset, I was growing, changing, and embracing the beautiful, imperfect journey of life. Chapter 20, The Horizon Ahead. The community center was bustling with the usual midweek activities, but today was special. In the main hall, under the warm glow of the overhead lights, I set up chairs in a circle. It was here that I planned to introduce my vision, a new program to help others find their path, as I had found mine. Grace walked in, her eyes taking in the scene. "You're making quite the stir, Eli," she said, her voice rich with that ever-present warmth. I grinned, moving another chair into the circle. "That's the goal, Grace. I want to get everyone as excited about this as I am." She chuckled, taking a seat. "And what exactly has you so fired up?" I leaned against a table, facing her. "I'm starting a new outreach program. It's all about giving folks the tools they need to grow spiritually, to face their own battles." Grace's eyes sparkled with interest. "Tell me more," she urged. I shared my plan, explaining how the program would offer various workshops and support groups, each designed to foster spiritual development and community support. Grace listened intently, nodding along. "You've really thought this through," she observed once I finished. "I'm impressed, Eli." A few others began to trickle in, drawn by the promise of something new. Marcus was among them, his energetic stride carrying him swiftly to us. "Hey, Eli, what's the big idea you've got cooking?" he asked, plopping down in a chair. I took a deep breath and began to outline my vision for them all. It's simple, really. I want to create a space where anyone can come and work on building their inner strength, their faith, whatever they're searching for. As I spoke, I could see the idea taking root in their minds, faces lighting up with curiosity and hope. Questions flew at me from all around the circle, and I answered each one, my heart swelling with the knowledge that this was it. I was doing what I was meant to do. The meeting went on, the room filled with the sound of excited voices, sharing ideas and making plans. When it was time to wrap up, I looked around at the group, a patchwork of eager souls, ready to embark on their own journeys of self-discovery. Grace caught my eye and gave me a nod that said, "You're doing it, Eli. This is just the beginning." And she was right. The road ahead might be unknown, full of twists and turns, but the horizon was bright. As the hall emptied and the last of the chairs were stacked away, Grace approached me. "Eli, you've come so far," she said, a gentle pride in her tone. "You're ready to lead now, and I'm just so proud to have been a part of your story." I smiled, my heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace. You've been my guide, and now I hope to be that for someone else." Outside, the evening sky was a tapestry of oranges and purples, a beautiful end to an inspiring day. I knew there would be challenges, but I also knew I had the strength to meet them head on. With a community that believed in me and a faith that was stronger than ever, I was ready for the horizon ahead, ready to guide and be guided, to teach and to learn. The path within these sacred walls had led me here, and now it was time to walk alongside others, helping them find their way, just as I had found mine. The journey was far from over, but with each new sunrise, I was excited to see where the path would lead. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed Within These Sacred Walls. Please smash that like button, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily storytelling adventures.